Hey everyone, this is CW. Joining me today to speak on privacy and security is Draeth from Pirate Chain. He's also one of the founders from the Blockchain Privacy and Security Adoption Alliance, or the BPSAA. Welcome, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. The BPSA Double A has been running for some time now and has numerous members focusing on privacy and security in the blockchain, with Ergo being one. For those who may not be aware of what the BPSAA is, can you give us an overview of what the Alliance is and what it sets out to achieve?
Yeah, so the Alliance is basically a group of projects that banded together. Originally, it was, Pirate Chain with Ether Protocol and let's see, there was Sentinel and Turtle Network at the time that came together to, work together to, gain exposure and, increase privacy and security within each other's chains and, help users with that as well. But over time, it shifted from that to becoming like a think tank for privacy and security within the space of crypto. And over time, we've added more members like Ergo, like Dragon Chain, Komodo, Firo, which is the most recent, and quite a few others. And the goal of us is now to essentially, help each other out with any issues that come up, help out our user base, work together in terms of problem solving within each other's projects, building together, and as well as influencing the entire market in terms of how things should be, whether it's regulations in terms of U.S. regulations, or just influencing in terms of what people see as a solid project. Because these days there's projects that are out there that are a dime a dozen, and some are legit, and a lot of them are illegitimate in terms of all these crazy tokens that are coming out. And we aim to help people in terms of finding a solid project, in terms of getting users' feet wet if they're new to crypto and things like that. So there's a lot of things that we aim to achieve, but our primary goal is, as you know in our name, privacy, security, and adoption. So,
yeah, you just touched on the collaboration there. It's great to be able to collaborate with various different projects and expand the knowledge base in regards to what is needed in the privacy space, but then also the security assumptions along with that as well.
Yeah.
All right, so just moving on, thanks very much for that rundown. You often hear people say, I have nothing to hide. Why do I need privacy? What would you say to that?
To quote, I think it was Edward Snowden that said, if you have nothing to say, then you don't need freedom of speech. Obviously, everybody knows we need freedom of speech, and privacy is just as important, because without privacy, you can't be your true self, and you have no freedoms without privacy. Imagine every single thing you do every single day is just monitored under a microscope by everybody, or your financial transactions viewed by everybody. That's just, it's scary to think about. And that's something that happens every day when you talk about financial transactions with banks or other vendors, or, your data just in general being leaked out everywhere just from your day-to-day activities. So privacy in general is just highly important to everybody.
Yeah, it's a very, very sort of concept that people don't really put their mind to. Obviously, there's data tracking and all kinds of bits and pieces now within our lives. So moving on, privacy on the internet and the blockchain space itself could be kind of summed up into two categories, both privacy and financial privacy. Can you explain the importance of privacy for users within the blockchain technology?
Yeah, so imagine this. You make a transaction with somebody with Bitcoin, right? Everyone knows Bitcoin, things like that. And now when you make that transaction, if anybody knows your wallet and the other person's wallet, they know that you're sending money to that other person. Everybody can see it. It's visible on the blockchain. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of it, right? Now, what happens when you accumulate a large sum of money on Bitcoin and somebody knows your address? Now you become a target because seeing that, hey, this person has millions of dollars in their wallet and they know who you are, now all of a sudden nefarious actors can target you, and just people in general just see, and no matter where you send that money, people know that you're sending it to other places, and it could be wallets that you own. They could also know that. So it's a scary thought. I mean, you don't let people in general look at your bank account, right? You don't let everybody in the world see what you have in your bank account. So why would you let people see what you have in crypto? That's where privacy coins come in and say, okay, well, I can have these assets and nobody can see what they are. Nobody can see the transactions that I make. That's why things like Pirate Chain, Ergo, and all those other privacy coins like Firo and Conceal and them are important, because you have your financial transactions that are private to only you, and basically you have to give consent for anybody else to see those transactions or your wallets.
Yeah, it's both a double-edged sword, isn't it? You've got an open, immutable ledger that you can track anything, but then the downside that is you're opening yourself up to attacks. And one of the most simple attacks is a $5 wrench attack, where if someone does find your identity or finds your address itself, and then works on to find your identity, it's as simple as taking to someone with a $5 wrench and extracting the private keys in that motion.
Yeah, and I mean, just imagine like your day to day. You don't let people see what you spend your money on. Granted, banks do that; they can see everything you spend your money on and track that data. But realistically, it's none of their business what you spend your money on. It's only you that should be able to give that consent for anybody to see what you use your money on and how much you have.
Exactly right. So even if you're in a store and you're purchasing something with your credit card, you're not handing over your entire bank statement and your transaction history while you're doing that. So yeah, it's something we kind of take for granted in the real world, but in the blockchain side of things, people kind of forget that it is an open, immutable ledger as well. So this is where privacy coins do come into their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So sort of in line with those sort of attacks, many associate sort of blockchains that offer privacy solutions with illicit activities. Do you think that's true?
No, absolutely not. I mean, there's always going to be some sort of illicit activity with anything. But you look at, for example, the U.S. dollar, or the U.S. currency, which is the number one currency used for illicit activities. So you don't see them trying to ban that or shame the U.S. currency, right? What's different about privacy currencies in that aspect? It's just people that know their privacy is valuable, and they should be able to withhold their privacy and not let it go, like you see in day-to-day activities. Like, for example, you have, and I love using this as an example, you go to, say, a supermarket and they have their MVP card, right? So technically it's free to have, and you just get discounts on products when you use it, right? But what are you actually giving up? You're giving up all that data in terms of what you spend your money on, how often you buy things, everything you purchase, and you name it within that store. And they build a database on you specifically for all that information, and try to do targeted ads or whatever. So if somebody gets a hold of that data, they know that, okay, he shops at this place relatively often. This is what he buys. So now I can try to target that person on all those different factors. So why would you give away that data for nothing, essentially? All that your data is super, super valuable. And a lot of people don't realize that. So they just think, well, whatever, but if some nefarious person gets a hold of that data, now they have a lot of leverage over you and potentially a lot of personal information that they shouldn't have.
Yeah, exactly. And touching on cash there, obviously majority of sort of illicit activities do sort of happen with cash and the fungibility around that. Is that something you can touch on in regards to the privacy coins or blockchain in general, the fungibility of tokens?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't understand what really fungibility is, it's the ability. It's basically one unit is the same as the other unit, and it's equal in every aspect. So when you have, say, Bitcoin, and you send some of that somewhere, and then say somebody gets a hold of it and it's a known nefarious actor, right? So they send that coin to somebody else, and then you somehow end up with a little bit of that. That coin that you have is not the same as any other coin because it has a known history, and especially with a history that has a nefarious actor within it. So that's what they call tainted coins. When you talk about fungibility with privacy chains, for example, I'll use Zcash, right? Zcash, their fungibility you would think is high up there because they have shielded transactions, but it's not shielded by default. 95% of the transactions that are done are transparent transactions. So now they have the same issue as Bitcoin, essentially. Maybe not as bad, but it's still pretty bad. But when you have privacy by default, like a lot of these chains that are out there now, like Pirate and Conceal and all these others, those are now completely fungible because every single unit is the same. You don't know where it went or where it came from. So you have it in your wallet. So obviously you know who sent it to you. But after that, that person who sent it to you doesn't know where you sent that to from that point. So it's completely blind in that aspect, which is great for fungibility,
Yeah, sorry. Yes, for sure. So moving on now, we have zero knowledge proofs. They play a major part in the privacy on blockchain technology. Is that something you can sort of elaborate on, give an example of how they're utilized?
Yeah, so I can speak specifically to Pirate Chain in terms of zero knowledge proofs because since we're a currency, the way that zero knowledge proofs operates, you can think of it as like a mathematical way to prove something is true without revealing any information behind that. So basically, with Pirate Chain, it's like you send somebody a currency, send somebody Pirate Chain, and the chain knows that, okay, he's sending this amount. I can prove without actually checking his wallet balance that he has the funds to be able to send this. So on the user side of things, you know that without being able to see somebody's wallet, that they have the funds to be able to send you without seeing their balance and seeing their past transactions and so forth. But then there's different ways that this is implemented with, say, like Leventhus, which is done by Firo, and then the multiple ways that Ergo is using it and so forth. So there's a lot of different implementations of ZKP. So.
Yeah, the example that kind of gets thrown around a little bit, and the one that I like to use often is, say you lose your mobile phone in a bar. You go back in there looking for it. You approach the bartender, and they pull out a phone. How do you prove that it's yours? So it's just simply by putting in your PIN code, and you can prove that the phone is actually yours without actually revealing any of the information, any personal information or any information on the phone itself. I think that's a good sort of a little example of how they're utilized.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, so moving on to security, we need to sort of consider two questions when discussing security. First of, how do blockchain users protect themselves? And then secondly, how does a blockchain network as a whole sort of protect itself from both internal and external attacks? So what advice would you give to a user on how to navigate this space and protect themselves?
Yeah, so the important thing is there's multiple ways you can protect yourself, but the phrase that's as old as blockchain itself is all pretty much is not your keys, not your coins, right? What that means is if you don't own the private keys to a wallet address that you have coins on, technically those aren't yours. You just have access to them. And the prime example of this is centralized exchanges. right? So you have your wallet that's personal to you that you send your coins to an exchange to do trading or to do whatever. The moment that you send those coins to that wallet address, yeah, it credits your account, but you don't own that address and you can't move that yourself. So if you were to get locked out of your account or banned or whatever that may be, or the exchange just goes under, you lost those coins, right? So the important thing is to make sure that you have the bulk of your funds in a wallet address that you own the private key to. On top of that, make sure you back up that private key to paper, to an external hard drive, you name it. Like personally, what I do is I have all my stuff backed up on multiple hard drives that are not stored in my house, obviously, and I also have paper wallets as well that are laminated. So I go pretty far in terms of making sure that all my stuff is backed up. Then in case anything happens with flooding or whatever, I still have my funds. So there's tons and tons of ways to protect yourself, but the most important way is to back up your private keys and remember your passwords, obviously. Secure your accounts in terms of 2FA, your email for your exchanges, whatever that you're on, whatever that may be. Make sure you protect yourself on that end as well and hold the vast majority, if not all of your coins in personal wallets that you own the private key to.
Yeah, I guess it's a good example with the sort of recent turmoil that the markets have sort of shown us over the last couple of weeks or months, for instance, and having your crypto on exchanges, which then can lock you out, but then also having custodial lending services as well. You sign over the rights to your Bitcoin or whatever token it is, and if they do close up shop, then yeah, you're out in the wild by yourself with no more crypto, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and then taking old example for all the OGs out there, Mount Gox.
Yep.
Mount Gox got hacked, and a lot of people lost their Bitcoin. Because it was stored on that exchange. So.
Yep, it's one of the biggest, the big famous one, isn't it? Numerous people were affected by that, and I think there's actually sort of a lawsuit or something in the works at the moment where people are trying to, Mt. Gox themselves are trying to return some of the Bitcoin that they have recovered to their users. So it's nice to see.
Yeah, but keep in mind that rarely ever happens. Usually, when exchange, especially for a large sum of money like that, they could just go under, and then you just lost everything.
Yep, exactly. And then the second part to that question, how's a blockchain network as a whole protected sort of from both internal but then external attacks?
Yeah, so blockchains have, in general, built-in security mechanisms, right? One of that security mechanism is proof of work or proof of stake and so forth, right? So as long as nobody, tries to do a 51% attack on that chain, then it's pretty damn secure. And so in a lot of cases, it's very, very expensive to try to do that too. So that's one deterrent. But sometimes people have the resources to be able to do that, and the way that that's mitigated is by some chains do half proof of stake, half proof of work. So somebody can't just rent out a bunch of miners and attack the network. Or there's other security mechanisms like delayed proof of work, which is what Komodo and Dragon Chain use to basically notarize transactions onto another chain so that, the main chain that's getting attacked, it can't get rolled back or can't, be double spent. So like the example I can use with Pirate Chain is we use delayed proof of work from Komodo. So our transactions get notarized onto Komodo's blockchain, and then their transactions get notarized onto Litecoin. So to be able to 51% attack our chain, you have to do all three at the same time, have 51% of all three chains, and then attack Pirate Chain, which is, pretty much not going to happen. So
yeah,
but in
extremely
terms
difficult.
of exactly, so and extremely expensive too. So, but the other thing for internally is to make sure that you're as decentralized as possible. There's no such thing as complete decentralization within a project itself. There's always some sort of control in terms of who owns the code or the limited amount of people that are able to change the code and so forth. But the important thing is to make sure that every other aspect is as decentralized as possible in terms of who can access it and how many people are required to have access to it. One of the examples that Pirate Chain uses is for our WAR token, which is basically the wrap token that we have on Binance Smart Chain. Now, to prevent any attacks on the chain itself, on the token itself, we don't have a minting function or anything like that, because there's a lot of cases where minting functions get abused, and all of a sudden you have additional tokens coming out of nowhere. So that token with the R coin is no longer one-to-one.
Yep.
So the way that we did it was we actually minted a specific amount of tokens, so that what ends up happening is now it's always going to be one-to-one, but the vast majority of those tokens are in a Gnosis vault that's under, basically 4 out of 7 people have to sign a transaction to release any of those additional tokens. So that's a built-in security mechanism that we have, so that if somebody just out of nowhere just becomes a nefarious actor and tries to take tokens and just send them to themselves, they can't. It actually takes multiple people to be able to approve a transaction first, to be able to add additional tokens to our bridge that we have. So there's a bunch of different security mechanisms projects can put in place, so that this way they can be assured that nothing, or the likelihood of something bad happening just due to one person, is mitigated. So
yeah, there's many risk factors there, isn't there? It's trying to mitigate as many as possible. Not going to sort of iron out everything, but just try and put as many checks in there as possible to sort of mitigate, like I just said, or as many risks as possible.
yeah, exactly. I mean, when you look at Bitcoin and you think about, well, who updates the code? Yeah, there's several people that are able to do that. And I don't know the details in how it's updated, because I haven't really actually looked into it. But I would assume that it takes several people to approve changes to be able to make changes for Bitcoin itself, right? Otherwise, if one person was the only one making the changes, then that one person can just make his own changes and benefit himself somehow by, say, minting additional Bitcoin or anything else like that. So it's important to have those mitigations in place. And the BPSA actually had a podcast not too long ago about risk mitigation, for those of you who are interested in listening to that on YouTube.
Yeah, so if you're interested, head over to the BPS Double A YouTube and jump on there and give that a listen. So that's a nice sort of overview on privacy and security in the blockchain ecosystem. In closing, in your opinion, what are the hurdles for increasing your privacy and security within the blockchain space?
The hurdles realistically are how far you're willing to go in terms of your privacy and security in general. Because the thing is that, like, to get started with privacy and security, basics are, install a VPN and things like that, encrypt your data and your wallets and stuff like that. And that's really simple stuff, right? So there's no real hurdles in terms of that. But the deeper you go down the rabbit hole in terms of enhancing your privacy, what I like to call a privacy shell around yourself, the more layers you add to that shell, the more difficult it becomes to do your day-to-day things, right? So using, like, say, alternate servers, and using, not using Windows and using, say, Linux, like a version of Linux that's really secure and private, and just additional things like that. The moment you start doing that, it's a lot harder to say, or you play a game on your computer with Linux. It's more difficult to install games. It's more difficult to surf the web. You have to make sure that your stuff is going to being routed through different ways and blah blah blah. So it becomes a massive deal over time with the more layers you add to that shell. That's why I like to refer them as hurdles as well, because how high of a hurdle are you willing to jump over to be able to say, do what you normally do, so.
Yeah, there's some tasks that you'd think just browsing the web, you don't really have to sort of have too much security. I think you just have to have a VPN when you're accessing your bank accounts and all that sort of thing. I think that just goes without saying in this day and age. But yeah, like you said, to what extent do you want to sort of increase all those sort of privacy and security factors?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny because the more you actually learn about privacy and security, the more you realize how much of your own data is actually being taken by third parties. Just by the sites you go to, or just using Google in general. They basically record everything. So it can make it crazy sometimes. Just realizing how much of your data you're actually leaking. So it's mind blowing once you realize that.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And that can kind of tie into the attacks, the both personal and sort of financial attacks that we touched on earlier. People being able to access your information that's stored somewhere and being able to put one and one together and find out your both online identity, but then your personal identity as well. And then, come and try and steal your crypto or anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's certain things that you have to also realize what data is actually important to you as well, right? Like, for example, say you have a Netflix account, and obviously they're recording data on there from you. So they have a database filled with, what you're watching, how long you watch, and so forth. But is somebody really going to take that information and somehow use it against you? No. It's just movies, But when it comes to financial transactions or things that are personal to you, that's when you have to start thinking, okay, how do I protect this data from being, in the open with other companies or whoever? So.
Yeah, one big one actually, one exploit is just a simple keylogger. So just keep your systems upgraded and everything along those lines. Like I said, you can go down the Linux side just to try and mitigate some of those risks.
Yeah, I mean, good example, like you just brought up with Linux, what you could do is just, utilize, basically use your crypto on there, basically only have your crypto on a Linux system. And then this way you can be sure that, if you say browse a website on your main computer and somehow a keylogger gets on there or, some malware, you can be assured that, hey, this is going to affect my personal computer and that sucks, but at least none of my assets will be stolen because it's on another PC or it's on a piece of paper or on a hard drive that's not connected to your computer.
Yep, exactly. So that's the nice little ending there, I think. Thanks for joining me for this video on privacy and security. It's nice being able to pick your brain from the perspective of a BPSAA founder, but also member as well. So thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
No problem. Take care.
You too.